Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the Eachine EW30 compact budget FPV goggles. At the making of this video they cost around $50 or 38 GBP, and the specs say that they have two individual 2-inch 480 by 360 LCD panels, which is just under standard definition, and they are giving a 120-degree field of view and a 4:3 aspect ratio, which can't be switched to 16:9. But I'll tell you now, the field of view is nowhere near 120 degrees, so I don't know where they have got that figure from. There's also a built-in DVR and a 1000 milliamp 1S LiPo that should give just under 2 hours of usage, but it can be powered via a USB port which charges the internal battery at the same time, and they have an adjustable IPD from 60 to 68 millimeters. But before I go any further, I'm going to give my usual FPV goggle disclaimer. FPV goggles are really difficult to review because we all have different shaped faces, different sized noses, and our eyes can be short or long-sighted and spaced apart differently. So I can only give my experience on those aspects of the goggle which may be completely different to somebody else. So I always encourage people to try and find a local FPV group like I did using Facebook, or go and travel to a drone event where there will be an abundance of people who will let you try them out. That being said, even though these goggles are pretty compact, it looks like they are using a Fresnel lens to magnify each panel rather than using proper optics. So if you require reading glasses, then I don't think these are going to be for you, because I'm short-sighted and I'm getting a clear image without any eye strain, although I do get the feeling that my eyes are having to focus on something that is close up. And with them being compact, you can't wear your glasses over the top of them. The first problem I see with the ergonomics of these goggles is that the faceplate is fairly flat. So when I put them up to my face, I get light leak through the sides when outdoors, but indoors the screens are bright enough to overpower any external light, and the nose cutout is big enough for me, which is rare with cheap goggles like these. The foam around the faceplate is non-removable though, so you wouldn't be able to add any foam inserts. I suppose you could add foam over the top to fashion a rounder fitment for a rounder face like mine. In daylight, you do get some light leak through the material from the front of the goggles, but it's not as noticeable as the light that leaks from behind. And even though I usually require an IPD of 74 millimeters, I'm getting a clear image with them maxed out to the quoted 68 millimeters, and you adjust the IPDs via this rocker on the top. For the price, the finish of the goggle is really nice and they don't actually feel that cheap. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on the camera, but the white paint has a metallic sparkle to it. You can also get them in black, but if these do take your fancy after watching this review, then I'd suggest getting the white version so that they don't heat up in hot weather. The 3-part strap is fairly decent. In fact, I don't think I've seen a strap with such a large adjustment. I'm going to brush over the button functions a little bit because the manual explains them well, so instead I'll just run over the features. There is a power button due to the internal battery, and a slot for a maximum sized 32GB class 10 micro SD card. There's also an AV in port which switches to AV in mode as soon as you plug something into it, but you aren't given any AV in cables in the package. These holes at the top look like speakers, but they are just air vents. It's also important to note that if you are recording with the DVR and power off the goggles using the power button without stopping the DVR recording, then the file will get lost because there's no supercap. So you have to make sure that you stop the recording before you power off the goggles, otherwise you will lose the video file. You're given dipole antennas, which suggests diversity. However, neither the manual or the website mentions diversity, so I wouldn't be surprised if one of the antennas is a dummy. I have tried swapping out different antennas and even different power outputs on the copter side, but the reception is always about the same. The built-in receiver supports 48 channels including race band, but they aren't labeled in the usual manner. For example, the Fat Shark band is labeled as B band and race band is listed as E band, so you would have to keep a comparison chart with you or memorize the frequencies if you want to fly with other people who might be using different goggles. The settings button doubles up as a band scanner, but most band scanners land on incorrect channels, so it's always best to select the band and channels manually. So you're kind of getting what you pay for with these goggles, and I'd only recommend them in conjunction with a cheap copter because they have some further issues. For example, they have an on-screen display which shows handy information such as the internal battery level and whether the DVR is recording, as well as the band, channel and RSSI information, but it can't be turned off. So if your copter has some icons placed up the top on its own on-screen display, then the goggles on-screen display will cover those up. The settings menu is straightforward with brightness, contrast, saturation and tint as options, but altering any of those settings doesn't seem to make much of a difference to the picture. I don't think I would rely on these goggles with an expensive copter at a bando or a racetrack. It's just for those people who are running on a tight budget with a budget copter. The DVR settings let you change the recording quality from VGA, which has a resolution of 640 by 480, recording at 24 megabits per second with a frame rate of 23 FPS. It's using the MJPEG codec, which is the same codec that Fat Sharks use and many other of the premium goggles, but 24 megabit is definitely overkill for a standard definition resolution. Then you can record in D1, which is 720 by 480p with a frame rate of 29 frames per second. And finally, you can record in what they are calling HD at a resolution of 1280 by 720. And you are about to see why MJPEG can't run at that resolution because it just drops too many frames, and it's the reason why high-end FPV goggles only record MJPEG in standard definition. And as cheap as these goggles are, you might be able to spot a problem with how the footage has been recorded. It seems that any NTSC source records to the DVR distorted. You don't see this through the screens, it's only when you watch the footage back through the DVR and you realize that you can't really use it other than finding a lost model, which I guess you could say that is what DVR footage was originally invented for. It seems like the DVR only records PAL sources properly, but then a PAL source seems to crop off some of the image, which you will see when I fly my KISS Alien at the end of this video. Some of the on-screen display is missing, so there's definitely a PAL NTSC mismatch with the DVR and the screens of these goggles. And there's no way to change from PAL to NTSC in the settings of the goggles, so the screens must be able to switch between PAL and NTSC, but the DVR can't. So that's a big downside for me, especially as I'd be mainly recommending these goggles to beginners who are probably flying tiny whoops, and tiny whoops mostly have NTSC cameras these days, with a few exceptions of course. The DVR also doesn't record any audio. You can add a date stamp to the video if you like. However, I've got that turned off because when you change the date option at the bottom, it saves the files with whatever date you inputted in that other option. The time limit is a little bit annoying. It's set to split the files every 3 minutes out of the box, and most flights last longer than 3 minutes. And the highest that you can change it to is 5. You lose about 4 frames when it splits the files, which isn't too bad, and most of my flights are under 5 minutes anyways, but it's something to be aware of. There's an auto record option, which I assumed would start the DVR recording as soon as you turned on the goggles, but that doesn't seem to work either way. Importantly, you can play the files back in the field if perhaps you have crashed and the battery has slung, so you can find your lost model. You can fast forward up to 8 times and pause the video, but there's no rewind option. And you can also protect or delete certain files within the goggles menu. So that's pretty much it for these goggles. I've shown you their flaws, so you'll have to decide if they are for you or not. But they sit at a low price point. You don't get much else in the box other than a USB cable to charge the internal LiPo, and the manual is pretty intuitive. If you aren't fussed about DVRs, then there are some other options to choose from, such as the Eachine VR006s or the EV800 without the DVR, and the Emax Tiny Hawk goggles are decent as well. They also have diversity, but none of the goggles that I've just mentioned have a DVR at this price point. So I'll leave you with some flying, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Inside the book that I wrote are all the words that we spoke, yet only with our eyes. Now is the time to choose. Somebody wins and some lose. I can see through your disguise. Lay down, hope for something better.